At 68 years old, Bishop Noel Jones finally broke his silence, and what he confirmed left people stunned. For years, whispers followed him everywhere he went. People talked about his ministry, his leadership, his health, and his personal life, but he never addressed the rumors directly. Supporters defended him, critics questioned him, and yet Noel Jones stayed quiet. That silence created more mystery around him, and every year, the curiosity grew stronger. People wanted answers, and for a long time, it felt like those answers would never come. But when he finally spoke, the truth was even more powerful than anyone expected. You won't believe how this story unfolded, because this was not just about one man's journey. This was a story of faith, fame, and the heavy price that comes with influence. Noel Jones had been a towering figure in the church world for decades. His journey started far away in Spanish Town, Jamaica, where he was born before moving to the United States as a boy. Even at a young age, he had something that set him apart. His voice carried power, his mind was sharp, and when he spoke, people listened. By his early 20s, he had already stepped into ministry, and it did not take long for people to realize that Noel Jones was not like other preachers. He was bold, fiery, and deeply intelligent. He had a way of turning a sermon into an unforgettable experience, and that ability drew crowds from everywhere. When he became the leader of City of Refuge Church in California, the ministry grew rapidly. Under his leadership, a once small church turned into a massive spiritual movement. People of all ages, backgrounds, and struggles came to hear him speak because he had something rare. He was both deeply spiritual and deeply real. He talked about faith in a way that felt personal. He spoke about struggles and temptations with honesty, and people connected with that. He did not stand behind the pulpit pretending to be perfect. He was open about the fact that life was complicated, and that honesty made him one of the most loved preachers of his time. But with fame came pressure, and with attention came rumors. As his ministry grew, so did the scrutiny. His name appeared in magazines, documentaries, and even on television. The reality show Preachers of LA introduced him to millions of people outside the church world, but it also brought new controversy. Some admired him for showing a different side of ministry, but others thought he had mixed entertainment with faith in a way that wasn't right. He became a household name, but he also became a target of constant discussion. This is where it gets interesting, because behind his powerful sermons and bold personality, people felt there was something more, a story that was not being told. Questions started to swirl. People wondered about his health as he got older. They noticed his energy changing during sermons, sometimes seeing him push himself harder than his body seemed to allow. Others started talking about his leadership style, worried that the church had become too dependent on him. Some even asked if there was a plan for the future of City of Refuge. And then there was his personal life, which became one of the most talked about parts of his story. Bishop Jones had been unmarried for most of his life, and his bachelor lifestyle sparked curiosity and sometimes criticism. People debated his choices, and social media turned his private life into public gossip. For many years, these questions followed him everywhere. People admired him, but they also wondered if there were secrets he would never share. What makes this story different is that Noel Jones did not try to appear perfect. He admitted he had flaws, but he never gave full answers about his struggles. That mystery created more tension, and by the time he reached his late 60s, the curiosity had reached a boiling point. Everyone wanted to know the truth. But here's the shocking part. When Bishop Noel Jones finally decided to speak, what he said not only confirmed people's suspicions, but also revealed something much deeper. It was not just about rumors or gossip. It was about the cost of leading for so many years, about the pressure of carrying other people's hopes, and about the reality of what it takes to stand in the spotlight for decades. His story was not just his own, It was a reflection of every leader who ever carried more weight than anyone realized. And this was only the beginning. His words would shake his church, his followers, and even his critics. This story was about to take a turn nobody expected, and by the end of it, people would never see Bishop Noel Jones the same way again. After years of whispers and quiet conversations behind closed doors, it became clear that the tension surrounding Bishop Noel Jones was not going away. His life had become a subject of endless debate. Supporters loved him deeply, but even they quietly admitted they wondered about certain things. His critics, on the other hand, watched his every move, waiting for confirmation of the suspicions they had carried for years. The craziest part was that nobody knew exactly what was true and what was just rumor. But one thing was certain: something about his ministry felt unresolved. The closer you looked, the more you realized that behind all the charisma, there was a man carrying a weight heavier than anyone imagined. People inside his church had begun to notice changes long before he spoke. Some said they saw the exhaustion in his face as he preached week after week. They noticed his pace slowing down, his voice sometimes sounding strained. Others pointed out that leading such a massive church for decades was not just a physical job, but an emotional one. He was a counselor, a mentor, a father figure, and a leader all at once. And yet, he never let on just how heavy it all felt. Let me tell you, the pressure was not only from inside his church. The world outside had its own expectations of him. Because of his fame, he wasn't just a pastor. He was a public figure. Every sermon, every comment, every decision was dissected by strangers who knew nothing about the burden of leadership. What made this story different was that Noel Jones seemed to handle it all with a kind of unshakable confidence. People called him strong, powerful, and brilliant, but behind that image was a man who had to live with constant judgment. When Preachers of LA aired, it brought more exposure, but it also magnified the questions about his personal life. People didn't just want to know about his ministry anymore. They wanted to know everything: who he was dating, why he wasn't married, and whether his personal choices matched the image of a pastor they expected him to be. And the more he kept quiet, the more the rumors spread. Some people believed he was intentionally avoiding the topic of his private life because he had something to hide, while others argued he simply wanted privacy. Either way, his bachelor lifestyle became one of the most controversial parts of his story. People debated whether a man who had never been married could truly lead and counsel families in the church. The reality was that this criticism followed him everywhere, even when he ignored it. Destiny took an unexpected turn as these questions began to shape how people saw him, not just as a preacher, but as a man. And then came the whispers about money and leadership. Like many high-profile church leaders, Noel Jones found himself facing speculation about how finances were managed. There was no proof of wrongdoing, but in a time when scandals involving pastors were constantly making headlines, even the smallest questions created doubt. Members of his congregation who loved him still wondered what the future of their church would look like without him. They worried about whether there was a plan in place if something happened to him. That fear created even more tension, and it felt like his entire ministry was living under a shadow. But here's where it gets interesting. Noel Jones was not a man who crumbled under pressure. Instead, he used it as fuel. Even with rumors swirling, he kept preaching with passion. His sermons grew more intense, as if he was speaking from a place of deep personal struggle. People could sense there was something behind his words, a weight he carried but rarely mentioned. This made him even more captivating because his humanity was showing, even when he didn't speak about it directly. He had become a symbol of strength, but that strength was built on years of sacrifice. For his supporters, this made them love him more. They admired his resilience and saw him as someone who could face storms and never let them break him. For his critics, however, this only made them more determined to dig deeper, convinced there was something he wasn't saying. That tension, the love from some and the suspicion from others, created a story that had the world watching. People didn't just want sermons anymore, they wanted answers. By the time Bishop Jones reached his late 60s, the pressure had built to a breaking point. People were no longer just curious, they were expecting him to speak. For decades, he had managed to hold on to his privacy, but whispers had turned into demands for the truth. The moment was coming, and when it did, it would change everything. Nobody could have guessed just how honest he would be when he finally opened his mouth. And when that moment came, it was not only shocking, it was historic. After decades of whispers, the day finally arrived when Bishop Noel Jones decided to speak, and the entire atmosphere shifted. The anticipation was heavy, almost as if everyone in his church and beyond knew something big was coming. He stood there, not as the untouchable leader people had known for so long, but as a man ready to strip away the mystery. What he said next confirmed years of speculation, but it also revealed truths nobody expected. This was not just a statement, it was a moment that would leave people stunned. With calmness in his voice, Bishop Jones admitted that the weight of ministry had finally caught up with him. For decades, he had carried the pressure of leading thousands, counseling countless families, and traveling the world as a preacher. He confessed that the burden was no longer just spiritual, it was physical, emotional, and mental. He revealed that his body could no longer keep up with the demands he once thrived on. People had suspected this for years, noticing the way he seemed tired during long sermons or how his once energetic presence appeared to be slowing down. Now, he confirmed it, saying out loud what everyone had been quietly thinking. But his confession didn't stop there. He went deeper, talking about the emotional cost of leadership. He admitted there were times when the weight of people's expectations felt too heavy, times when he questioned his ability to keep going. For someone who had always appeared strong, this vulnerability shocked his congregation. He was no longer the larger-than-life figure they saw every Sunday. He was a man admitting his struggles openly, and that honesty only made his words more powerful. Then came the most personal part of his admission. Bishop Jones finally spoke about the part of his life that had created endless speculation, his bachelor lifestyle and his personal choices. He acknowledged that being unmarried for so many years had caused confusion and even disappointment among some of his followers. He admitted that his choices, though personal, had fueled much of the controversy surrounding him. For years, people had debated this topic, and now he had confirmed what many had suspected. It had been a source of tension for him, too. This level of honesty was rare, and it sent a wave of silence across the crowd. And yet, what made this moment truly powerful was that his confession did not come from weakness. It came from strength. Bishop Noel Jones stood before his people and showed them that true leadership was not about pretending to be perfect, it was about being real. He admitted his flaws, his struggles, and the toll of carrying so much responsibility for so long. In that moment, he didn't just reveal the truth about his own life. He gave his followers permission to see him as human. And that honesty was both shocking and healing. For many, this was the twist they never saw coming. Instead of hiding his struggles like so many leaders before him, he brought them into the light. He showed that transparency could be a form of power, that admitting the truth before it turned into a scandal was the mark of a true leader. But this left people with even more questions. Would this mean he was stepping down? Was this his way of preparing the church for a major change? Or was this just the first step toward reshaping his role in ministry? As the news of his confession spread, reactions poured in from every direction. Some praised him for his honesty, saying it was rare to see a leader of his stature admit his humanity. Others, however, claimed this was proof that he had been leading on borrowed time. His critics saw this as confirmation of their doubts, while his supporters saw it as proof of his integrity. Social media exploded with opinions, and suddenly, Bishop Jones's name was trending everywhere. What was once quiet speculation had now become a worldwide conversation. But here's where the story took an even more surprising turn. His confession didn't weaken his ministry, it strengthened it. People who had followed him for years felt a new connection to him. They respected him not just for his preaching, but for his courage to tell the truth. For many, this was the moment Bishop Noel Jones became more than a preacher. He became a symbol of authenticity in a world where leaders often hide their struggles. Yet, even with all this praise, the question still hung in the air. What was next for him? Would this be the beginning of the end of his time as the leader of City of Refuge, or was this the start of a new chapter in his journey? The aftermath of Bishop Noel Jones's confession was unlike anything his ministry had ever seen. His words had sent a ripple through his church, his supporters, his critics, and even those who had never stepped foot inside his sanctuary but had followed his journey from afar. Inside City of Refuge, there was a strange mix of emotions. Some people wept openly, moved by the honesty of their pastor. Others sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just heard. For many, it felt like a piece of history unfolding right in front of their eyes. They had always seen Bishop Jones as a pillar of strength, someone untouchable, someone who seemed to carry the weight of the world with ease. But now, they saw a man who had carried that weight at a great cost. What made this moment even more powerful was how it forced people to see him differently. Younger members of the church, who had only known him as a giant in the pulpit, were shaken. They realized for the first time that even great leaders are not superhuman, that even pastors with worldwide fame are not immune to exhaustion, loneliness, and the weight of expectations. For older members who had walked with him through decades of ministry, his confession brought a sense of closure. It was as if all the silent worries they had carried about him were finally spoken out loud. His honesty, though painful, was healing because it gave people permission to admit their own struggles too. But this revelation didn't stay inside the church walls. Social media platforms exploded with clips of his confession. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube were flooded with conversations about Bishop Jones. Some people praised him as a rare example of transparency in leadership. Others criticized him, saying this proved they had been right all along to question him. The divide was sharp. Half the world saw him as a man of courage for speaking his truth, while the other half saw him as a leader who had waited too long to address what everyone already knew. Even pastors and leaders from other churches began weighing in. Some admitted privately that they felt the same exhaustion but lacked the courage to speak up. They said Bishop Jones's words gave them hope and reminded them that vulnerability could be a form of strength. Others worried that his honesty would weaken the respect that leaders needed to guide their congregations. But no matter where people stood, they couldn't deny that his confession had started a much larger conversation. For those outside the church world, this moment was fascinating. People who had long been skeptical of organized religion saw in Bishop Jones' story a reflection of something bigger, the impossible expectations placed on spiritual leaders. They saw a man who had carried the burden of perfection for decades and was finally saying, "I'm human too." It made some people feel empathy for him, while others used it as a reason to criticize the megachurch model altogether. Either way, his name was everywhere, and his words had sparked debates that went far beyond his own congregation. Inside City of Refuge, new questions started rising. Would Bishop Jones retire? Would he choose a successor to lead in his place? Or would he stay in ministry but step into a different role, one that allowed him to rest while still guiding the church spiritually? These questions created tension, not because people doubted his decision, but because nobody could imagine the church without him at its center. He had built it, nurtured it, and carried it for decades, and now, for the first time, People were forced to picture what life would be like without his voice leading them every Sunday. But here's where the story truly took another twist. Even though Bishop Noel Jones had confirmed the suspicions and addressed the whispers, he didn't reveal his exact plans. He left people with uncertainty, he admitted the struggles, he owned his humanity, and he lifted the weight of secrecy, but he didn't give anyone a clear answer about what would happen next. This only created more speculation. People wondered if he was preparing for a major announcement or if he was simply choosing to take things one step at a time. That mystery kept the world watching. And yet, one thing was undeniable. Bishop Jones had changed the way people looked at leadership forever. He showed that being honest about your struggles doesn't have to ruin your legacy, it can make it stronger. He proved that vulnerability can be as powerful as authority. His confession became a turning point, not just in his own story, but in the lives of those who had followed him for years. It was a reminder that leadership comes with a price, that every public figure carries private battles, and that no amount of fame or power can shield someone from the realities of age, exhaustion, and emotional strain.